My name is Claire Donovan, and I want to tell you about the 14 months that nearly broke me and the moment everything finally turned around. I had always dreamed of owning my own bakery. Not a chain, not a franchise, just a small, warm, flour-dusted corner of the world that was entirely mine. I grew up watching my grandmother move through her kitchen like she was conducting a symphony, pulling sheet pans from the oven with her bare hands, humming to herself while she crimped pie crusts and rolled fondant. She was the one who taught me that food was more than sustenance. It was memory. It was love made edible. When she passed away, she left me just enough money to make the dream real, and I poured every single cent of it into a small shop on Birchwood Avenue I named Gold Crust Bakery. The first year was everything I had imagined and harder than I had anticipated. I woke up every morning at 3:30 to start the doughs, unlocked the front door at 6, and rarely sat down before 9 at night. My feet were perpetually sore. My hands were always cracked from washing them between batches. I barely saw my friends. I missed birthdays and holidays and long phone calls I kept promising to return. But I did not complain because the shop was growing, slowly, steadily, the way anything real grows. Regular customers started learning my name. The local teachers placed standing orders for Friday mornings. A wedding planner found me through a referral and booked 3-tiered cakes in a single afternoon. I was building something, and I could feel it holding weight. That was when Margot Ellison came into my life. She arrived on a Tuesday in October, the kind of cold, bright day that makes everything look a little more beautiful than it is. She came in holding a leather portfolio, wearing a blazer that looked expensive, and she had the kind of smile that arrives before the person does. She introduced herself as a food blogger and local influencer with, as she described it, a very engaged following across multiple platforms. She said she specialized in spotlighting small businesses and that she had heard wonderful things about Gold Crust. She asked if she could do a feature, take some photos, write a piece. I was flattered. Of course I was flattered. I offered her a seat, brought her a slice of my brown butter almond tart and a lavender latte, and we talked for nearly an hour. She was charming. That is the word I keep coming back to. She was genuinely, effortlessly charming, and she asked the right questions, the kind that made me feel like what I was doing actually mattered. She asked about my grandmother. She asked about the sourcing for my flour. She asked whether I had ever considered doing cooking classes. By the time she left, I felt energized in a way I had not in months. I told my employee Maya about it that evening while we were closing up, and Maya, who is 23 and very online, looked Margot up immediately on her phone. Margot had about 12,000 followers on Instagram, a modest but active blog, and a decent presence on a local Facebook community group that had several thousand members. Not a celebrity by any measure, but in a town our size, that kind of reach mattered. I was genuinely excited. The feature post went live 2 weeks later. It was beautiful. She had taken gorgeous photos, all warm tones and soft light, and the writing was enthusiastic and specific, mentioning the almond tart by name and calling the shop a hidden gem of Birchwood Avenue. Within 48 hours, I had a noticeable bump in foot traffic, a handful of new Instagram followers, and 2 catering inquiries through my website contact form. I sent Margot a thank you message and a complimentary box of pastries by way of gratitude. That, as far as I understood it, was the end of our interaction. I was wrong. About 6 weeks later, Margot came back into the shop. This time she was not smiling quite as broadly, and she skipped the pleasantries faster than I remembered. She sat down, folded her hands on the table, and told me that she had been thinking about expanding her content operation. She had an idea for a monthly local business spotlight series, a proper ongoing collaboration, and she wanted Gold Crust to be one of her founding partners. In exchange for regular features, behind-the-scenes content, and what she called consistent brand visibility, she was asking for a monthly fee of $400 and a standing weekly order of baked goods for her to use in her own content. I blinked at her. I told her, as politely as I could, that my margins were thin and that I could not afford a $400 monthly marketing fee on top of a weekly product contribution. I told her I appreciated what the first feature had done for the shop, but that I had to be careful with every dollar. She smiled tightly and said she understood completely, and she left. I did not hear from her for 3 weeks. Then the reviews started. It began with a one-star review on Google. The username was something generic, and the review said, in very precise language, that the pastries at Gold Crust had left the reviewer feeling unwell, that the shop smelled of mildew, and that the staff had been rude. I stared at that review for a full 5 minutes. I had never had a complaint about cleanliness in my life. My kitchen passed every health inspection with high marks. Maya was one of the warmest people I had ever met. I flagged the review and moved on, assuming it was a fluke. Then came a second one-star review, a different username, similar language. Stomach discomfort, poor hygiene, dismissive employees. Then a third. Within 2 weeks, I had received 7 one-star reviews in a span of days, each one vague enough to avoid specifics, but consistent enough in tone to clearly be coordinated. My overall rating, which had been sitting comfortably at 4.8, dropped to 4.1 almost overnight. For a small bakery, that kind of drop is not just cosmetic. People make choices based on those numbers. I watched my Tuesday and Wednesday foot traffic soften. One of the wedding planner's brides called to ask if everything was all right because she had seen some concerning reviews online. I was sick with worry. I had no proof it was Margot. Not yet. But I am not naive, and the timing was not lost on me. I documented everything. I printed out every review, noted the posting dates, the usernames, the language patterns. I kept a running document on my laptop that I added to every time something new appeared. 2 of the reviews used the phrase "unfortunately disappointing," which struck me as oddly specific, and one of them mentioned a detail about the shop layout that was inaccurate in a way that suggested the reviewer had never actually been inside. A 4th review appeared on Yelp with almost identical phrasing to one of the Google reviews, and I saved screenshots of both side by side. Margot, meanwhile, had posted nothing negative about Gold Crust publicly.
She was smarter than that.
What she was doing was quiet, deniable, and designed to erode rather than attack. It was a slow bleed, not a wound you could point to. I reached out to a lawyer friend of mine named Patricia, who handled small business matters and had helped me with my lease. I explained the situation and showed her my documentation. Patricia told me that proving coordinated fake reviews was difficult but not impossible, and that what I needed was more evidence and more patience. She also told me something that stuck with me. She said that people who do things like this usually cannot help themselves. They escalate. They get sloppy. They do something that leaves a fingerprint. She told me to keep documenting and to be ready. In the meantime, I decided to fight back the only way I knew how, which was to pour more of myself into the bakery. I launched a new weekend menu with seasonal items I had been developing for months, but had not felt ready to unveil. I started posting more consistently on Instagram, showing the process, the early mornings, the careful work, the things that made Gold Crust worth coming to. I personally responded to every legitimate review, positive and negative, with grace and specificity. For each of the suspicious one-star reviews, I replied calmly, expressing regret that their experience had not reflected our standards, and invited them to reach out directly, knowing they never would because they had never been there. I wanted anyone reading those responses to see a business that was thoughtful and accountable. I also quietly reached out to some of my regulars and asked if they would be willing to share honest feedback online if they had a moment. I was careful about this. I did not offer incentives and I did not coach them. I simply said that I had noticed some unusual review activity lately and that genuine reviews from real customers made a difference. Several of them were not only willing but indignant on my behalf, and over the following 3 weeks, a wave of detailed, specific, clearly genuine 5-star reviews rolled in. My rating recovered. The new weekend menu brought in people I had never seen before. And then Margot made her mistake. It came from an unexpected direction. One evening, a woman named Denise, who was part of the same local business owners Facebook group I belonged to, sent me a private message. She owned a small gift shop about 8 blocks from me, and she told me she had been having similar problems. A string of vague, oddly coordinated bad reviews had appeared on her pages in recent weeks, and she had been trying to figure out where they were coming from. She had done some digging, she said, and she wanted to talk. We met for coffee the following afternoon, and Denise showed me what she had found. She had noticed that several of the reviews on her page and several on mine were posted from accounts that had no other review history, no profile photos, and had been created within a very narrow window of time. That alone was suspicious, but not conclusive. What was more interesting was what she had found on a freelance task platform. She had been browsing through gig listings in a moment of frustrated curiosity, and she had found a listing from a user whose profile, while not using Margot's real name, was connected to a blog URL that redirected to Margot's website. The listing offered payment in exchange for leaving reviews on local business pages according to a script that would be provided. The listing had been taken down by the time Denise showed it to me, but Denise had taken screenshots before it disappeared, and those screenshots showed the URL connection clearly. I felt the floor shift under my feet.
It was not just me.
It had never just been me. Margot was running what amounted to a small extortion operation, targeting local businesses with manufactured bad press until they paid her. Denise thought there might be at least 2 other businesses in town who had gone through the same thing. One of them, a small yoga studio, had actually paid her, believing the reviews were real and that Margot's promotional services were their only lifeline. I called Patricia that same evening. Patricia was quiet for a long moment after I finished laying everything out for her. Then she said, carefully and with visible effort not to sound too pleased, that what I had just described constituted defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and potentially fraud and extortion depending on how the district attorney's office wanted to look at it. She told me to consolidate every piece of evidence I had. Every screenshot, every date, every review, every piece of correspondence. She told me to reach out to Denise and the other affected businesses and see who was willing to participate in a coordinated complaint. And she told me to file reports with Google, Yelp, and the freelance platform in parallel. We spent the next 2 weeks building the case. Denise was organized and thorough and angry in a productive way, which I appreciated. The yoga studio owner, a soft-spoken woman named Renata, had saved every email she had ever exchanged with Margot, including one in which Margot had implied, in language that was just direct enough to be meaningful, that increased promotion could help counteract any negative perception that might be circulating online. That email was extraordinary. Patricia read it and said that she would very much like to be in the room when someone showed that to a judge. The gift shop owner had paid Margot. She had transferred 2 payments of $400 each over 3 months, and she had the bank records to prove it. Patricia filed a civil complaint on behalf of all 3 of us, and simultaneously, Denise filed a report with the local police department's consumer fraud unit, who, to their credit, took it seriously within 48 hours of receiving Denise's documentation. The freelance platform cooperated with the investigation and provided account records that confirmed the connection to Margot. Google and Yelp, once presented with a coordinated fraud report with supporting documentation, removed the suspicious reviews in batches. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks felt like, because it was not triumphant. It was exhausting and stressful in a different way than the preceding months had been. There were phone calls with lawyers, follow-up requests for additional documentation, a deposition-style interview with an investigator that lasted 2 hours. There was a period where I did not know how the legal piece would resolve or how long it would take, and I still had a bakery to run every single day. I was tired in a bone-deep way that is hard to describe. But the reviews were gone. My rating climbed back to 4.7 within 3 weeks of the removals. The weekend menu continued to pull in new customers. Maya, who by this point knew everything that had been happening, cried a little bit when she saw the rating recover, which made me cry a little bit too, and then we both laughed about it, and she went back to icing a tray of lemon shortbreads. The civil case settled out of court several months later. The terms are confidential, but I will say that the settlement was meaningful and that it covered a substantial portion of the documented revenue impact from the review campaign, as well as legal fees. More importantly, as a condition of the settlement, Margot signed an agreement prohibiting her from operating any similar promotional scheme or taking any action targeting the businesses involved. The criminal side of things was less dramatic. The district attorney's office determined there was sufficient evidence for charges related to fraud and extortion, but Margot ultimately accepted a plea agreement that involved community service and a period of probation. I was not consulted on the plea terms, and I will not pretend I felt entirely satisfied by them. What I felt was a complicated, imperfect relief. The kind you get when something is over but not resolved in the way you always imagined it would be. What I did not expect was the aftermath in the community. The local paper ran a story. It was not front-page news, but it was visible enough to reach the people who mattered. Several business owners in town reached out to me directly after it was published, some to express solidarity, some to ask questions, and at least two who admitted quietly that they had paid Margot money over the previous year and had not understood what they were really paying for. A local business association used the story as a catalyst to put together a workshop on identifying and responding to coordinated review manipulation. I was asked to speak at it, which I did, standing at a folding table in the back room of a hardware store with a cup of lukewarm coffee, talking to about 30 small business owners about documentation and evidence and the importance of not panicking. I think about my grandmother a lot when I think about that period. She used to say that anything worth building takes long enough that you will have time to be tested before you finish it. She was not talking about business when she said it. She was talking about something else entirely, one of those conversations I was too young to fully absorb at the time and have only understood in retrospect. But it applies. It applies to the bakery, and to those 14 months, and to every morning I drove to Birchwood Avenue not knowing if the fight was going to be worth it. It was worth it. That much I can say, without any ambiguity. Gold Crust is still standing. We recently marked our 3rd anniversary, and I hosted a small celebration on a Saturday morning with complimentary pastries and a table outside on the sidewalk and more people than I had chairs for. The wedding planner brought her newest bride in for a cake tasting that same afternoon. Maya brought her little sister, who wants to be a pastry chef, and spent most of the morning asking me very serious questions about lamination and fermentation schedules. My regular teachers came by with a card that had 37 signatures on it. I still wake up at 3:30 in the morning. My hands are still cracked from washing them between batches. I still miss birthdays sometimes and stay too late and forget to eat actual meals. But the flour-dusted corner of the world is mine, and nobody took it from me. I made sure of that.